wave god in this motherfucker. Hey, shout my nigga Demi Tito.
Got the song pop like I'm Iggy. All they talking about is last night like I'm Demi. Say you got
It's the godfather of the Irish Drill Show and my boy Demi TV.
Damn ski pole for Michael Jackson.
Let's see what the chat thinks. Let's see. Cause that nigga Demi was like, I'm king.
What's up, Dean family, Dean Nation? Today we're doing a reaction to Ingograph's show. You feel me? And it's called Why So Many People Have Gone Missing or Vanished from Traveling or Going to the Bermuda Triangle. Or to the Bermuda, you feel me? And if you're new to the channel, like, comment, subscribe, and share the video on all social medias, and comment below what reaction you want to do next. Check out the original video in the description box below. Roll to 100K, a million, and a billion. Click that subscribe button. Let's birth as a family and as a nation. Make sure you grab you some snacks for this reaction, because this shit gonna be kinda long. You feel me? And I ain't talking about Tyrone when I'm saying that shit. Long dick style. Hello. And check out the Dean TV clothing merch in the description box. So go copy some heat and drip. Yeah. Feel me? And no further ado, let's get into this reaction.
June 23rd, 2015. A 14-year-old American boy, Perry, sends a message via Instagram to a friend. Me and Austin are crossing to the Bahamas tomorrow. Come with us. Soon after, one of his friends receives a message on Snapchat that reads, "We're effed." 8 months later, their 19-foot vessel was found capsized off the coast of Bermuda. Strangely, the engine switch was in the off position. Even more strangely, an iPhone 6 was found, but someone had switched it off before the battery had run out. The contents of that iPhone might just solve what's become a perplexing mystery.
So how everything just get turned off
like
in
many
that
of the 50
area.
other ships and 20 planes that have gone missing over the last century in the area known as
Shit
the
ain't
Bermuda
right.
Triangle, these two young men completely vanished. What happened to them? We'll talk about this later. For now, we'll just say that these boys might have shared a similar fate to hundreds of people who seemingly vanished into thin air in this area of the world. After the boys disappeared, Bermuda Triangle conspiracy theories flourished once more, flooding online forums and comment sections. Still, the urban legends of vanishing ships and planes go back to a time long before people communicated on digital platforms. The Bermuda Triangle conspiracy theory began when a writer named
You've
George
been
X.
going
Sand
missing
wrote
from
a
that
magazine
area
article
for
Fame
so
magazine,
long.
a US-based
Why
magazine that featured stories on
investigate
paranormal
over in that area? You feel me?
phenomenon. The article in
1
question
+
was
1 =
titled
2, right?
"Sea Mystery at Our Back Door." It starts by talking about a
But that shit ain't math.
350-foot ship named Sandra, which set off from Savannah, Georgia in 1950 with the intention of delivering 12 men and 300 tons of insecticide to Puerto Cabello, Venezuela. Sands wrote, "It would not be delivered, not ever. A search for the vessel would prove fruitless, with the case, like many others of the future, being called unsolved." Sands wrote, "It became but another baffling incident in a strange series of marine disappearances at the doorstep of the United States." He said they all took place in what he called a watery triangle bounded roughly by Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. The triangle has no exact boundary line, but it's generally thought to be made up of 500,000 to 1,510,000 square miles of water. One of the more notable cases that Sands brought up in his article was the disappearance of Flight 19, an unarguably confounding tale that involved 5 TBM-type aircraft that took off from the Naval Air Station in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, on December 5th, 1945, for a training exercise. 14 men on those 5 planes vanished into thin air, a story that shocked a nation and embarrassed the U.S. Navy. Leading the bombing and navigation exercise for the new recruits was Navy Lieutenant Charles Carroll Taylor. He had around 2,500 flying hours behind him and was very familiar with this type of aircraft, while the young pilots he was leading each had around 300 flight hours of training. This was the last flight exercise that the trainees needed to complete before they graduated. They ran into trouble sometime during the operation, with Taylor's last message being, "All planes close up tight, we'll have to ditch on less landfall. When the first plane drops below 10 gallons, we'll all go down together." He earlier radioed about having problems, explaining, "Both of my compasses are out. I'm trying to find Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I'm over land, but it's broken. I'm sure I'm in the Keys,
What?
but I don't know how far down and I don't know how to get to Fort Lauderdale. The mysterious part isn't that the planes ran into trouble. What's mysterious is that as the last message was received only 4 hours and 10 minutes after takeoff, Taylor and his trainees could not have gotten that far from base. Taylor was wrong about his assumed position, but the fact that all 5 planes vanished so close to home is indeed confounding. What's more confounding is that after learning that Flight 19 was in trouble, 2 PBM Mariner flying boats were dispatched from the base at Banana River in Melbourne, Florida, now called Patrick Air Force Base. Only one returned. Just less than 30 minutes after takeoff, one of the PBMs, Trainer 49, reported that they were close to the point at which Flight 19 was assumed to be located. That communication was the last thing anyone ever heard from the plane. Like Flight 19, it vanished, as did the 13 crew on board. It was a head-scratching time for the Navy.
Well, damn, how the fuck all them people go
Head-scratching time
missing?
for decades to come for the U.S. government. So how do so many planes just disappear, with not one single part of them ever being found? It's not like the military didn't put any effort into finding them. The U.S. launched one of the biggest search operations ever at that point in history. The Navy ordered 248 planes to search for any remnant of the lost aircraft. 18 Navy ships looked for the wreckage, as did a whole bunch of merchant vessels and a few civilian vessels. Between them, they covered 200,000 square miles of the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico. The Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale Museum wrote many years later, scouring practically every mile of open water off the coast were 6 planes from the 3rd Air Force, 120 planes from the Navy Air Advanced Training Command, and several aircraft from the Air Transport Command, the Boca Raton Army Airfield, the Coast Guard, and the RAF in Nassau. In addition, dozens of Navy and Coast Guard surface craft joined in the hunt. Taylor was later found guilty of mental aberration for leading his trainees to their deaths, but his dear mother was less than pleased with that outcome. She led a subsequent investigation into the tragedy, after which in 1947, the Navy admitted that Taylor was not responsible for loss of lives and naval aircraft, leaving the whole situation with no agreed-upon conclusion. Importantly, as far as this show goes today, this has happened at a time when people in the USA were obsessed with unidentified flying objects, UFOs, with numerous reports in the late 40s of possible alien spacecraft flying erratically at high speeds above American soil. The public read stories about men in black suits and what were described as flying saucers. The sightings always seemed to happen in rural areas, as if the aliens liked the peace and quiet of the rugged countryside. A comedian later joked, the fact that they cross galaxies and always end up in places like Fife, Alabama, this was certainly a strange phenomenon. The Roswell UFO incident was one part of what's now called the flying disc craze. In the years to come, there were numerous more sightings of UFOs. In some cases, little green men were said to walk out of the spaceships. In what became known as the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter, 5 adults and 7 children showed up at a police station in Kentucky in 1955, each person looking sincerely distressed, saying they had a 4-hour gun battle with green guys no taller than 4 feet. In 1961, a couple in rural New Hampshire, Barney and Betty Hill, claimed aliens had abducted them. Alien abduction became a new fear for many, perhaps overly credulous Americans. Even the CIA secretly looked into it. Dr. H. Marshall Chadwell, CIA Chief of Scientific Intelligence, wrote in the 1950s, unexplained objects at great altitudes and traveling at high speeds in the vicinity of major U.S. defense installations are of such nature that they are not attributable to natural phenomenon or known types of aerial vehicles. Nonetheless, he also said, a fair share of the U.S. population is mentally conditioned to the acceptance of the incredible. He warned that if the Soviets so chose, they could possibly spread misinformation about crazy phenomena, and a part of the U.S. population would buy into it. You might also say that it helped the CIA that people were focused on UFOs and not the shocking activities it was involved with. Such were the times. So when people began to read Sand's article on the Bermuda Triangle, an urban legend was born. People began to think our cosmic neighbors had possibly abducted those planes and ships. This was a good time to sell magazines and newspapers, so more people wrote about it. In 1962, a writer for the American Legion magazine, novelist Alan W. Eckert, didn't let the facts get in the way of a good tale when he said that one of the last communications from Flight 19 was, "We are entering white water. Nothing seems right. We don't know where we are. The water is green. No, white." Eckert's next comment would have had him flagged on Twitter, or X, in the present day, since he wrote that the Navy Board of Inquiry stated the planes actually flew off to Mars. Kirkus Reviews rightly later said that Mr. Eckert was fond of employing poetic license when it came to his versions of the facts. But that doesn't mean people didn't have the right to feel somewhat perplexed and excited about what was happening in this ocean stretch. Weird things had happened, or at least it seemed that way. No one disputes that many ships and planes have vanished in the area. The question is there anything paranormal going on? Before we answer that, let's hear a few more stories. In 1918, the USS Cyclops set off from Brazil, carrying 306 passengers and crew. She was to take a shipment of magnesium ore to Baltimore, Maryland, in the U.S., but somewhere along the way she vanished. It was a hell of a lot of ship to disappear. The vessel had a displacement of 19,360 long tons, or 19,670 tons when full. Its length measured 542 feet. That's a lot smaller than the ill-starred Titanic, which had a displacement of 52,310 tons, but it's still a huge hunk of steel to lose. It happens, of course, but what doesn't usually happen is a ship's sister ship goes down in the same area. In 1941, one of her sister ships, the USS Proteus, vanished with her 58 crew members somewhere in the Bermuda Triangle. This was the time of World War II, but it seems no German U-boats were deployed to the area. Like the Cyclops, the disappearance of the Proteus remains a mystery. The Cyclops had 3 sister ships in total, the Proteus being one, the Nereus being another. Life aboard the Nereus turned out to be not much fun either. She also disappeared in 1941. Since, like the Proteus, she was carrying cargo that would have gone to the war effort, some believe the Germans were responsible, but again, U-boats were not in the Bermuda Triangle. A naval history website jokingly wrote about this. Neither loss was the result of German submarines, so either the Bermuda Triangle aliens had it in for that class of ship, or there was something wrong with the design of the ship when carrying ore, which was denser than coal. We'll come back to this observation later. The only sister ship left was the USS Jupiter, AC-3, which was converted into the U.S. Navy's first aircraft carrier, USS Langley. On February 27, 1942, Japanese bombers hit her with 5 heavy bombs. 13 crew died in the initial attack. That ship was abandoned. Many survivors were transferred to the USS Pecos, which the Japanese also attacked. 400 men died, 319 of whom were from the Langley. Talk about an unlucky class of ships. We digress. Back to the Bermuda Triangle. It's often said the loss of the USS Cyclops was the single largest loss of U.S. Navy lives on the high seas when not directly involved in combat. You can read that just about anywhere online. But some historians have pointed out that the USS Insurgent deserves that spot. It too was a Bermuda Triangle casualty. The Insurgent used to be l'Insurgent since it was French, but it was captured by the US in the Quasi-War. The conflict started after Congress in 1793 suspended repayment of French loans after the US borrowed to fight the British in the War of Independence. It's a bit more complicated than that, but we don't really have time to talk about US military history in detail today. All you need to know is that the US rumbled the French and expropriated this rather large frigate. On August 8, 1800, it sailed into the Bermuda Triangle on its way to the West Indies and was never seen again. All 340 crew vanished with the ship. The USS Pickering and her 105 crew also went down that August, also in the Bermuda Triangle. 2 ships, 2 disasters, similar area. Speculation said it must have been the same storm that hit both, but it was all speculation. So, you can understand how the whole Bermuda Triangle thing got off the ground. Got off the ground is an unfortunate choice of words when we consider the planes that went down in this region. In the late 1940s, there was a spate of plane disappearances there. One was the loss of the BSAA Star Tiger, the passenger plane operated by British South American Airways, a commercial airline business run by the British and responsible for taking people to the Caribbean and South America. On January 30th, 1948, it vanished. There was no distress call. The plane and its 31 passengers and crew were never seen again. The Brits launched an investigation into the tragedy, after which it was stated, in the complete absence of any reliable evidence as to either the nature or the cause of the accident of the Star Tiger, the court has not been able to do more than suggest possibilities, none of which reaches the level of even probability. What happened in this case will never be known, and the fate of the Star Tiger must remain an unsolved mystery. That would have been bad enough by itself. But then, later that year, the same thing happened to an American airliner, a Douglas DST, which was carrying 29 passengers and 3 crew members, including families who were returning to the U.S. after spending their Christmas vacation in Puerto Rico. 2 passengers were just babies. We know the passengers were in a good mood, a festive mood. Before the accident, the plane's captain, Robert Lindquist, was heard on the radio saying, What do you know, we're all singing Christmas carols. As the passengers slept, the plane approached Miami. Lindquist told ground control, "We're approaching field, only 50 miles out to the south, all's well. We'll stand by for landing instructions." That was the last anyone heard from the cockpit. There was no SOS call. The U.S. Weather Bureau later said that the flying conditions were ideal that night. 48 Coast Guard, Air Force, and Navy ships scanned where the wreckage should have been, but nothing of the plane crew or their belongings was ever found. These were the days when flying was still novel for the public, a luxury that was nevertheless uncomfortable. As one history website writes, flying was loud, cold, and unsettling. Airliners were not pressurized, so they flew at low altitudes and were often bounced about by wind and weather. It was expensive, too, around $260 in the 1940s to go coast to coast in the U.S. That's close to $3,500 in today's money. Flying was way too expensive for most people until the late 50s. In the 40s,
So it's my second date with that guy that I met on Hinge. He comes to pick me up at 7. I open my door, and the first thing I see...
flying was a 50s. In the 40s, flying was a luxurious way to risk your life. That much was evident when, just after the American airliner vanished, another British South American Airways flight disappeared over the Bermuda Triangle, again making no distress call. All 7 crew and 13 passengers went down with the plane. Subsequent investigations led to the conclusion that this was yet another unsolved mystery. It wasn't until 1964 that the term Bermuda Triangle was used. As you'll remember, George Sand had talked about a watery triangle bounded by Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, but he hadn't expressly written about the Bermuda Triangle. That job fell to an American writer of everything paranormal, Vincent Gaddis. He penned the term in Argosy magazine, one of those adventure magazines that were very popular with the boys and the men back in those days. Adventure and detective mags were for those people like YouTube is for you these days. Although we hope that here at the Infographic Show, we're not quite as unscientific as Mr. Gaddis was back in the 60s. Here's a snippet of text from Gaddis's now famous story. The mysterious menace that haunts the Atlantic off our southeastern coast had claimed 2 more victims. Before this article reaches print, it may strike again, swallowing a plane or a ship or leaving behind a derelict with no life aboard. Imagine reading that while your father is shouting at you to do your job and milk the cows. People loved a good mystery. Gaddis's story contained a lot of factual information about the mysterious vanishings of planes and ships. Still, at various points in the article, he suggests something unnatural was to blame for those many tragedies. After Gaddis ignited the storm of conspiracy theories, there have been all sorts of hypotheses, ranging from alien abductions to huge sea monsters dragging down the ships or snatching planes out of the sky. Others have said the Bermuda Triangle is some vortex into another dimension, possibly to the lost city of Atlantis. Then there are the alien theories. Others have been slightly more scientific.
Talking about aliens, we just experienced alien just a few days ago in Florida. Miami, actually.
Maybe the reason is the ocean farting and occasionally blasting out large amounts of methane gas. But some have talked about something much more prosaic, admittedly not anywhere near as exciting as the conspiracy theories. Maybe, these rationalists have said, a lot of the accidents were down to human error and or vehicle malfunctions. Take, for example, Flight 19. We already know the compasses on Captain Tyler's plane were malfunctioning. He also had a hangover that day and wasn't wearing a watch, a much-needed instrument back then. Compasses and watches were how you navigated in those days. His men, who would have strictly followed his orders, might not have had the courage to tell him he was heading in the wrong direction. Maybe, and sorry to say this, his dear mum might have been wrong and the Navy was right. In fact, one of his trainees can be heard saying at one point, "Why don't we fly to the west?" Taylor wanted to go east, which was further into the ocean. Also, the planes they were flying, sometimes called Iron Birds, were like flying tanks. They were heavy, about 10,000 pounds each. When they went down fast and hard. And if they hit the water that day, it is likely they descended to the bottom of the ocean very quickly. As for the rescue planes, the PBM Mariner was known as the flying gas tank, since even a little spark could make one explode. No wonder the Navy stopped producing them in 1949. When the plane went missing on that fateful day, a nearby ship reported it had seen a giant fireball in the sky. A little later, when the ship was close to the location where the Mariner had seen this ball of fire, it sailed through an oil slick. That day, there were also squalls on the surface, and at 1,000 feet, wind speeds were around 40 miles per hour, with 75-mile-per-hour winds at 8,000 feet. This was recorded at 4 p.m. that day, not long before the accident. If a ship or a plane goes down in this area, there's every chance it could slip into one of the many trenches, some of the deepest on the planet. The seafloor of the Bermuda Triangle is about 19,000 feet down at one tip in the south and 27,500 feet down at the Puerto Rico tip. That's not much less than the lowest in the world, which is the Marianas Trench in the Pacific Ocean between Guam and the Philippines. It's 35,814 feet below sea level. While the hypothesis of methane erupting causing ships to struggle to stay afloat is possibly true, it's been proven such eruptions could mess up a ship's day. Bad weather is the most likely culprit for the accidents. Back before weather satellites became a thing in the 1960s, hurricanes would have hit without people knowing, hence all the stories of distress signals not being issued. But the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, or NOAA, has another theory. That is, there is no such thing as a Bermuda Triangle phenomenon at all. It says there's merely a lot of traffic in the area, and if you look at the number of ships and planes going through it compared to the number of disappearances, it's not any worse than any other part of the world's oceans. Terrible tragedies have happened on the high seas all over the world. In terms of loss of life in the U.S. Navy, not directly related to combat, we tend not to hear too much about Typhoon Cobra, which in December of 1944, during the war, ripped through the United States Pacific Fleet in the Philippine Sea. It sank destroyers USS Hull, USS Spence, and USS Monaghan, and 28 other vessels were damaged.
That's crazy. What the fuck?
160 miles per hour, and violent waves swept dozens of aircraft from the carriers. 790 men were killed and 80 more were injured. No one talks about a Philippines triangle after that, despite the tragedy being the worst thing of its kind in U.S. history, possibly all of naval history. Sure, the ships didn't just
Why would they want to keep that secret?
But that's because they weren't alone. One ship out there in that storm could certainly have disappeared without a trace. And do you remember the USS Cyclops and her two sister ships that sank? Well, it might not have been bad weather that sank the Cyclops. It's now thought that the manganese ore it was carrying, which is much denser than coal, had room to move around in the holds even when full. When it gets wet, it can get slurry, said one expert, and this could have caused the ship to list or tilt to the side. Its sister ships were carrying something similar, bauxite ore. Just perhaps these ships, all belonging to the same class, were flawed in the design and not capable of carrying this kind of cargo.
They basically setting these people up for failure. What the fuck?
It's close to the equator, near a wealthy part of the world, America. Therefore, you have a lot of traffic, said a scientist for the NOAA when talking about the Bermuda Triangle. He cited studies undertaken by Lloyd's of London and the U.S. Coast Guard, stating that they came to the same conclusion he has, that the combined forces of nature and human fallibility outdo even the most incredulous science fiction. He did say the weather is bad there. Yes, that's a factor. He even did some research on methane gas eruptions and found out that the gas could possibly rise into the air and cause a plane to blow up when the gas mixed with engine exhaust. A United States Geological Survey scientist confirmed this could happen, but that scientist said such a blowout hasn't been seen for 15,000 years. Granted, the story of the two missing boys is a strange one. It's now known that they had prepared for bad weather. The National Weather Service issued a special marine warning when they were out there, warning ships to be careful as heavy rains and winds faster than 40 miles per hour were on their way. When one of the boys wrote "We're effed," his friend said the accompanying video showed a storm on the horizon. What is still weird is why they turned the engine off and why the iPhone that was found was turned off. This all looked a bit iffy by anyone's standards, as did the fact that the boys' bodies weren't on the boat. People wondered, was this like one of those stories where young men see something they shouldn't see, such as someone trafficking huge amounts of illegal substances? It wouldn't be the first time that's happened. The iPhone could possibly hold the answers, but Apple couldn't get under the hood. One of the parents said to the media, "We're not giving up on the iPhone's potential for evidence until all viable efforts have been exhausted." Apple did try and do a recovery job, but had to take the thing apart and clean it, and that seems to have wiped all the logs.
That's fucked up.
Was
That's
Apple in on
tough.
it? Maybe the traffickers were working with the government and the government with Apple. Now we're joking here. We don't think that. But if you believe in the Bermuda Triangle, it wouldn't be a stretch to believe the other story. The boys are still missing. It's a very real tragedy for the parents, as it must have been for the families and the relatives of all the others who have died in the Bermuda Triangle. And we very much doubt that stories of sea monsters and vortexes to Atlantis help any of those people. The truth is out there, but it's usually not anywhere near as entertaining as the speculation. Now you need to watch The Sinking of the Titanic hour by hour, or have a look at Chernobyl nuclear explosion disaster explained hour by hour.
Titanic for a whole fucking hour, or hour by hour. Fuck that. I hope you guys like that, Dean Family, Dean Nation. Like, comment, subscribe, and share the video on all social medias, and comment below what reaction you want to do next. Check out the original video in the description box below. Road to 100K, a million, and the ability. See you guys next time. Love you guys. I'm out. And go show this channel some love. You feel me?